Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today we're going to talk about keyboards. I haven't talked about these in a while. Now, I wouldn't consider myself to be a keyboard expert, but I've owned a lot of them over the years. And I don't think of it as a hobby or a collection, but rather just a search for the perfect keyboard for my needs. And so I have tried out a bunch at this point, and I kind of have a good feel of what it is I like about a keyboard. And recently I've been using these two keyboards the most. This one is the 8BitDo mechanical keyboard, and then this one right here is the Nuphy Kick75. Both of these have a more retro look to them. You can see that this one is modeled after the Commodore 64, and then this Kick75 has a retro aesthetic to it as well. And so in this video, we're going to compare these two and talk about some other alternative options as well, and why it is that I like these so much, but why they're not quite perfect either. So grab a snack and drink and let's go ahead and get started. Quick disclaimer, I did purchase both of these keyboards myself, and the companies had no involvement with this review at all, and of course, all opinions are my own. Okay, as we get started, let's talk about how we got here in the first place, and it all really came down to this guy. This is the Nuphy Air 75. I've been using this keyboard and the version 2 of it for years at this point. It is a low-profile keyboard, so you can see it's nice and flat, but also very compact, so I've really enjoyed using this. And so this was my primary keyboard for quite some time. It is a little bit expensive, I think it's around $120, but yeah, I definitely got my money's worth out of this one. However, for the past year or so, I've actually been using this 8BitDo keyboard more. I've actually done a review of one of these keyboards before, but it was for the NES colorway, but they're basically the same thing. Over time, I came to appreciate the Commodore 64 one a little bit more, just because it reminded me of that old keyboard, whereas the NES one was just a little bit out of place. However, it is worth noting that I have made some modifications to this keyboard. For example, these A and B programmable keys are actually from the NES one, so I pulled out the keycaps from the Commodore 64 one, which were just brown like this, and then I put in these red ones, just because I thought it looked a little bit cool. In addition, I'm not a huge fan of the switches that they use on those keyboards by default, which are kale white, and they are tactile, which means they are clicky. I've changed them out for Gatoron reds, which means that they are linear and a lot softer. However, I did keep the white ones on my A and B buttons to give them a distinct sound compared to the others. Let me give you a quick listen. And so the keyboard that I am testing today is like my own personal version, one that I've changed out the switches, and I've also changed out these two keycaps, but more or less it's going to be the same. Now the Nuphy Kick75, which we're going to use to compare it with today, is a more recent release. I've only had this one for about a month. This one is similar to the Air 75 model that I showed earlier because it is low profile, although this one does have a high profile option as well. The big difference is that this one has a larger shell. You can see it's a lot bigger and padded. It also has a volume wheel, and it has that retro aesthetic that we were talking about earlier. So this one feels more like a modern retro keyboard compared to the 8BitDo, which is a bit more nostalgic. So we're going to organize this video in a couple different key areas. So number one will be like how the keyboard looks and some of the other options that we have for it in terms of colors and keycaps. Then we'll talk about like the keys and the typing experience and battery life and stuff like that. So let's start with the look, and we'll talk about the 8BitDo one first. Now, like I mentioned, it is Commodore 64 inspired, but there are a bunch of different color options as well. In addition to the NES model that I had reviewed last year, there's also a Famicom version as well. So this one has got a more Japanese aesthetic to it. They've also released a bunch of others that I have not picked up, including one that has an IBM colorway, so it looks like an old 90s or even 80s PC. There's also a Sega Saturn model, and this one's kind of unique looking too. And then finally, there is an Xbox one. So this one is transparent green like the OG Xbox. I think this is pretty cool. In the end, I love the fact that we have a bunch of different color options, and I think that the Commodore 64 one looks the best, but that IBM one is also very tempting. Now, in addition to these retro-looking keys, we've also got physical knobs. So this will switch between Bluetooth and wired, and then 2.4 gigahertz wireless mode. We've also got a volume knob and then a couple function buttons. And then on the right side, we also have an LED light that'll turn on when you're connected. So this is what it's going to look like. But really, other than that, that's about all that's going on with this keyboard. So no RGB backlighting or anything else like that. It is a pretty simple setup. And 8BitDo leaned really hard into the whole retro thing because the keyboard also comes with these as well. So you've got a programmable joystick that you can use, for playing games, but each of these directions can actually be programmed as a set of keys as well. So in addition to just being the up and down and left and right arrows, you could actually have this function as macros. And same thing with these big old A, B buttons right here, which are essentially just really big keyboard buttons, which is pretty funny. These can be programmed as well, either just a single keystroke or also up to 6 keys at once. And it's going to be the same as the A and B down here. And so what I've done personally is I've set up like hotkeys for load state and save state, and then I can use that when I'm like doing retro gaming. But honestly, I have not used these buttons or this joystick at all. I could see it being used as like a retro gaming setup, but it just takes up a lot of space on my desk. So when it comes to look and feel, I think that 8BitDo really nailed it. The keyboard itself just looks amazing, and it is pretty cool to have these accessories, even though I have not found a use for them myself. Now the Nuphy looks a lot different than the 8BitDo and has a bunch of different features. Number one, there are no additional color options for this. It's just what you see right here. And it's got like this transparent white shell on the front, and then we have this back plate as well. And a lot of these aesthetics are completely ornamental. For example, we have this little pad that we can pull out, but it has no function and you can't buy any extra ones to change out the colors. So it's just a couple things that are removable. Same thing on the front. We've got this big 75% right here, which is a little bit weird for me. I don't need to know that my keyboard is a 75% keyboard, but it also comes off and it's magnetic. But again, they don't sell like any extras right here. I'd love to have like a personalized one that says like Retro Game Core on it. That would be amazing. But as it stands right now, I just have to look at the fact that yes, my keyboard is 75%. The one big aesthetic change that you can make on the Kick75 is that you can choose between either low profile keys or high profile keys when you check out. They both have the same price. They're $100 each with free shipping. And the only major difference besides the high profile keys is that the volume knob is a little bit different with the high profile one. In fact, I prefer the one on the high profile keyboard, even though I prefer a low profile keyboard overall. And sadly, again, they don't sell that extra accessory because it would be pretty cool to be able to change this out. Now, one of the big draws from Nuphy in general is that they sell a lot of different keycaps. Some of them are limited edition and others they just have all the time. And so that's the way that you can change the look and feel of your keyboard. Here's an example with my Air 75. So this is my version 1 model. This is a version 2 model. But what I did is I changed out the keycaps here. This one is called the Engineer keycaps. And I just love the look of this. And it used to look like that. And so it was a completely different look and feel after I changed out the keycaps. So I like the fact that we do have that ability to change it. And thankfully, the price is not too expensive for new keycaps, usually around $20, $25. And all you have to do at that point is just pull out the old ones, put the new ones in. I like to put on music and just kind of treat it like an experience, like putting together a Lego model. It's kind of fun. So that is definitely one thing that you could do with the Nuphy as well. In fact, they sell additional keycaps that you can buy at the time of purchase. So there's definitely ways that you can customize the look and feel of this as well. But in general, I would say that the Kick75 has that more modern retro look to it. Just the fact that it has RGB lighting, backlit and all that. And then just overall, it just feels and looks a little bit more modern. It even has a little Super Mario kind of platforming level right here across the back, and they probably changed these characters just enough so that they wouldn't get sued. But you can see it's like Adventure Island or something. You got a Pokeball right there. You've got Hollow Knight. Like, what are they thinking? On the side, it says 8-Bit Odyssey, and I'm not really sure what an 8-Bit Odyssey is, but you can see that they were definitely trying to capture that vibe. It's also worth noting that the RGB lighting is completely optional. You can hit function and down to make it go away or function up to bring it back, make it go brighter. You can also change out the different colors by going left and right with the function key too. Altogether, there are like 20 different patterns and you can change a bunch of different colors. I think they said there's something like millions of different combos that you could make. In general, I usually don't use the RGB lighting just because it can take up a lot of battery life. We'll talk about that in a later section, but it is kind of cool to have all these different options depending on what you actually want in terms of keyboard input. Now 8BitDo does sell additional keycaps, but as far as I can tell, it's only for the NES colorway. But these are kind of neat. They have like additional characters and logos and whatnot on them, so this might be worth it for you as well. Now in terms of size, the 8BitDo is definitely larger. It's a little bit taller, it sits up more, and then also it's wider. So if you are looking for something more compact, then the Kick75 is definitely going to be that better fit. And if you are looking for something even more compact, then the Air 75 I think is even smaller. So this might be a better fit too if you are very tight on space. Now in terms of price, they are pretty close. It's $90 for the 8BitDo keyboards and it's $100 for the Nuphy Kick75. And you can often find them on sale for cheaper, like the 8BitDo one will often go on sale on Amazon, and I also have a coupon code for the Nuphy one. I'll leave that down below. Okay, now let's talk about the keys and some of the functions that we have in terms of like keyboard layouts and whether or not they have a number pad, things like that. So to start, the 8BitDo one actually has the most key options available. By default, it's going to have the ANSI layout, which is what we use in the United States, but they also have an ISO option for most of their keyboards as well. So that'll be great for people like in the UK and Germany who are used to that setup. So we do have those options with 8BitDo. By contrast, all Nuphy keyboards are going to be ANSI, so the American style layout compared to the ISO one. Now the keyboards that I have do not have that number key on the right side. However, 8BitDo has more options than Nuphy in that regard. They do offer a full 10 key option, but it's only going to be the NES and Famicom colors as far as I know. But 8BitDo also offers an accessory number pad, and this is about $45, and it comes with Bluetooth 2.4 gigahertz and wired as well. It can also be used standalone as a calculator, which is a nice touch. And I actually own one of these, but I don't have one because I gave it to my wife. I did not like it. Number one is the fact that it has its own connectivity option, and so that means that you'll have to connect Bluetooth both the keyboard and the number pad separately. And so I found that to be really annoying, and it just took up a lot of space on my desk, and so I don't use mine at all. Now on the Nuphy side, they don't offer the number pad. They also don't have a wider version, like they often will have a 96 key version. They don't offer it with the Kick75, at least right now. And so if you want to use a number pad with your keyboard, then the Kick75 may not be a good fit. However, there are some key options on the Nuphy that I prefer over the 8BitDo. Number one is the fact that by default, it will come with the Mac layout here with the function buttons. And in the box, it's going to come with the Windows ones as well. So you can just pop these out and put the Windows ones in, and it actually has a Mac and Windows toggle up here. And so that'll be great if you're a Mac user or if you use both like me. Honestly, I keep mine on the Mac function, and then when I switch over to Windows PC, I just don't really look down at the keys themselves. I know where they are. By default, the 8BitDo is going to be Windows friendly, but you can also just go into the Mac settings and switch around these two keys if you would like as well. The other thing to keep in mind is going to be the default switches that are inside of these keyboards. And like I mentioned before, it's going to use Kale whites on the 8BitDo. Those are very close to like a blue switch, so they're going to be very clicky, like I mentioned before with my A and B buttons. And like I said, I found mine to be a little bit too clicky in 80s for me, so I changed mine out for linear keys instead. We'll do a whole like sound test and everything in the next section, but I just wanted to mention that by default, these are going to be very clicky. Now, the nice thing about Nuphy is they've always given a lot of different switch options when you check out. So there are 4 different options for the Kick75. And you can see here that I chose the red linear switches, which means that they're a lot smoother to press down on. I'm also using reds in the 8BitDo, but I had to put those in myself. And Nuphy also offers other switches, including a tactile brown, so that's going to be clicky like the 8BitDo is by default. And then they also have 2 other linear switches. The silver ones are supposed to be a lot more lightweight, so very easy to press down on, and then they have what they're calling blush, which is kind of a mixture between the red and the silver. And if you don't know anything about switches, then I would say check out the Nuphy website because they actually have audio clips that you can listen to get a feel for how each of them will sound. So now let's move on into the typing experience itself and how it feels to type and then also how it sounds. Starting with the 8BitDo, this one rests off the ground quite a bit. You can see that it is just kind of a thick keyboard altogether. It's also a fairly hollow case as well, which means that when you press down on it, it has a bit of a hollow thunk to it. Not a bad thing, it just feels very retro. When it comes to the typing experience itself, I think it's fine. It's just a little bit more elevated and reminds me of being like back in high school and programming on an actual Commodore 64, because that's kind of what it's like. So in general, I do like the feel of the 8BitDo keyboard. It's been one of my primary keyboards over the past year or so. It is elevated quite a bit, so I have to kind of lift my wrists up as I'm using it, but otherwise it's just been a really nice experience. I will say that adding red switches made a whole world of difference. When it was just the standard whites, it was just way too loud and clicky for me, and so I definitely prefer this setup now. Now, my Kick75 is the low profile option. There's a high profile option as well that'll be a lot more similar to the 8BitDo, but I personally prefer low profile, so that's what I went with here. And so you can see that by default, the Nuphy is a lot thinner than the 8BitDo one, but the Nuphy also has some kickstands on the back. So if you do want a more elevated experience, you can just flip these out, and that's going to make the keyboard a little bit taller. But I gotta be honest that this amount of elevation without having any sort of slope to the keys themselves just makes it feel a little bit awkward. I do not like typing like this. It kind of feels like you're typing against a wall that's been pushed up against you, and so it just feels a little bit awkward to actually touch. It doesn't feel as good as the 8BitDo, which has that slope and these special keys for it. And so I would say that in general, if you're going to be using a low profile keyboard like this, you're you're going to want to take these kickstands down because that gives it a more low profile experience overall. The thing that I like about low profile keyboards is that you can easily reach all of the keys without having to reach up at the same time. And so it's a completely different feel when it comes to typing, and I do prefer low profile in general. So in terms of profile and height, this one does feel very good. It's kind of an in-between between the 8BitDo and then their original Air75, which was a lot lower down. And so this one is kind of a nice middle ground for me. It is also worth noting that you can convert your Kick75 to low or high profile depending on what you already have. It is going to cost $30 for a conversion kit, and what you'll have to do at that point is pull out all the keys and switches and then change out some of the components inside. The shell itself will be the same. And then of course, bear in mind, you'll have to buy high profile switches and high profile keys as well. So it's going to cost you probably about $60 to do that conversion, which is obviously less than $100, but is going to take some work. In fact, just looking at the instructions was a little bit intimidating just for me, and so I'm not sure if I would want to do this conversion kit myself. And so in the end, when it comes to comparing just the overall feel of these two, it's not a very good apples to apples comparison just because I have a low profile keyboard here, a high profile keyboard. And so it's not the exact same thing, but I personally like the Nuphy a little bit more just because it's kind of flat and it's a good middle ground between being super low profile, but also still very easy to access. And so if we're just talking about like ergonomics and comfort, I would prefer to use this low profile keyboard over the 8BitDo, but it's actually pretty close because they both feel very good, just a little bit different. So now let's get to the big event, which is talking about the sound between them and how they just feel when it comes to typing on the keys themselves. That's always a very important thing with keyboard videos. So number one, bear in mind that I'm using red switches on my Kick75, which is going to give a different sound and feel, but it is still linear, so it's nice and smooth. In addition, Nuphy has done all sorts of sound dampening in this shell in particular to make it just a lot softer and quieter. And so this is a very soft feeling keyboard. The way they also describe it is being very bouncy, but personally I find it to be just kind of smooth and soft, like a little bit padded, and it feels great. And then of course, remember for my 8BitDo that I have changed out the switches. These are now red switches, so they are not going to be as clicky as they are on the original keyboard. But even then, with these red switches, it's still quite loud as a keyboard altogether, and a lot of that comes down to just the overall hollowness of the shell. Again, I don't think it's a bad thing, but if you're trying to type very quietly, this is not the keyboard, especially if you're going to have those original white switches inside. So the way I would describe it is that the 8BitDo is a little bit more vintage and retro in overall volume as well as just feel. Meanwhile, the Nuphy feels more like a modern keyboard that happens to look very retro. So now let's do a sound test between the two, both of these using red switches. Okay, now let's talk about connectivity options between these two keyboards. We have a lot to work with. We'll start with the 8BitDo. So this one has Bluetooth as well as 2.4 gigahertz. So you have a USB dongle you can plug directly into your PC and just use that wirelessly. In addition, it does have a wired option and you can just plug this into your PC directly as well and not worry about battery life. We've also got a bunch of headphone jacks right here. Those are for like the joystick and the other buttons as well. They're going to plug in like this. The way you switch this is you go into Bluetooth and then tap this to get into pairing mode. You go to off if you want to use it wired, and then you would use 2.4 to use the dongle. However, it is worth noting that as far as I can tell, there's only one Bluetooth profile on this keyboard, which means that you can only plug this into 3 different machines. You can use one that's Bluetooth, one that's 2.4 gigahertz, and then one that's wired, and that's all you have. And I've been using this at the studio for about a year at this point, and so what I do is for Bluetooth, this connects to my Mac. For 2.4 gigahertz, I take that dongle and I put it in my Windows PC, and so that's how I connect between the two. It does take up one USB port on my PC, which is kind of a pain, but that's how I switch between Mac and then over to Windows. Now the Nuphy is a similar setup in that it does have a 2.4 gigahertz dongle and it's also magnetic, so it just comes right out. I love the fact that you can store it right in the keyboard, which is not something that we've seen in some other Nuphy keyboards. gigahertz. And this one also has Bluetooth connectivity and also wired, but this one has 3 different Bluetooth profiles. So the way this works is once you turn it on, you would then press function in 1, 2, or 3 to connect to your different Bluetooth profiles, and then function in 4, that's going to connect to your 2.4 gigahertz dongle. And then of course it also works wired, and so that's going to be 5 different connectivity options with a single keyboard here. It's also worth noting that the Nuphy has a higher polling rate, so 2.4 gigahertz wired and Bluetooth are all 1000 hertz. By contrast, the 8BitDo is 500 hertz for the 2.4 gigahertz as well as the wired option, and then only 250 hertz for Bluetooth. So if you are looking for like high speed polling when it comes to like gaming, then this is going to be a better fit just because it has a higher rate. And so in general, when it comes to connectivity, if you are looking to connect to multiple computers at once, then the Nuphy will give you more options and they will have a faster polling rate. Now, in terms of software, we've got multiple options when it comes to, mapping your buttons and whatnot. With 8BitDo, they have their own proprietary software that you have to get either on Windows and Mac, and then you'll connect your keyboard to that, and that'll allow you to basically remap the keys however you would like. You can also set up things like macros and stuff as well within their software, but just bear in mind it will require you to download an additional app. On the other hand, Nuphy has a bunch of different options. Number one is that they have their own software. It is called Nuphy IO, and it's brand new, but essentially this will allow you to do things like, mapping out your buttons and making macros and stuff. But then you can also adjust things like whether or not this knob does something besides volume, like you can make it do a zoom instead, or you can also change your lighting profiles on the fly. It is worth noting, something I didn't even realize after a month of use with this until today, is that you can press down on this volume knob and it'll mute the sound for there, but you can also program it to do other things. Now, if you don't want to use the Nuphy IO software, you can also use the standards within the industry, including QMK as well as VIA. And so those are things that, if you use mechanical keyboards, you probably know about. I don't really know anything about them. But I do want to note that if you want a QMK VIA style keyboard like this, it'll cost you an additional $20 at checkout. So it does look like Nuphy is trying to get you to use their software as opposed to the industry standards. But the nice thing is that it's web-based, so you don't have to install any actual software. You can do it right there from a browser. For me personally, I don't use any special software with either of my keyboards. I just use my keyboards like keyboards, and so I don't want to focus too much on that here, but you do have some options. It is worth noting though that you don't really need to use their software just to kind of get by. So for example, if you wanted to change out your lighting on this, you can just use it with the function keys, and then for like programming your A and B buttons on the 8BitDo, you just press the star button and program it that way. And so none of the software to me is really all that essential, but it's nice for people who need it. Okay, finally, let's talk about battery life. So the 8BitDo says they'll give you about 200 hours of battery life. They have a 2000 milliamp hour battery. And over the past year or so, that has held true for me. I usually charge it about once a month. It doesn't have RGB lighting, so it doesn't drain the battery super fast. Now, the Nuphy has a larger battery. It's 2500 milliamp hours, but it has RGB lighting options. And so they say that you should get about 360 hours if you turn off the RGB and only about 90 hours with it on. And so that's one of the reasons why I do not actually use the RGB lighting all that much. It is still going to have a couple lights, like for example, this one over here. But other than that, yeah, it's been pretty great on the battery so far. Okay, so putting it all together, what of the two keyboards do I actually prefer? And I've been kind of going back and forth about this, but I think that the looks of the 8BitDo are a lot better. It's a lot more vintage and retro looking and just kind of has a really great vibe on my desk. However, I do definitely prefer the sound and the typing experience on the Nuphy Kick75. It just has a much more modern kind of gliding feel to it compared to the 8BitDo, which is a bit more old school. Now, obviously, this is all just a matter of taste, and so it's really going to be up to you what you prefer, but yeah, I think in general what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Nuphy in my studio, and then I will put the 8BitDo at my desk at home. In the end, I like both of these keyboards, and I want to use them all the time, but I think that in general, if I had to choose one to take with me on a deserted island that also had a computer and internet, I would choose the Nuphy over the 8BitDo. When it comes down to it, I spend more time typing on my keyboard than looking at my keyboard. And so even though I think this one looks cooler on my desk, this is the one that I would actually want to use. I also like having additional connectivity options with this one, so I can have my Mac and my Windows PC, but then also maybe my phone if I ever need that as well. So long story short, I think they're both great keyboards, but I'll probably use the Nuphy one more just because I like the feel of it altogether. Now, before we go, I have one wild card that I want to throw out there as well. This one is called the Spock Keep or something like that. It's got a crazy name on Amazon, but the branding is actually called Surman. And so you may have to search around on Amazon to actually find this keyboard in particular. I'll leave one link down below. Either way, this one was recommended to me by my buddy Benny Fitz. So this guy is a streamer and has one of the most wholesome streams that you'll ever find on Twitch. I'll also leave this link down below. It is awesome. Anyway, he messaged me about 6 months ago and mentioned that, hey, I know you like keyboards, and this is a keyboard that I found that I really love. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because this one is $50, and often it is on sale for $40, including right now. And I think that's a crazy price for what you're getting in terms of keyboard. So if you are not looking to spend $100 on a keyboard, this $40 to $50 keyboard is almost good enough. So this thing is Bluetooth and has 3 different Bluetooth profiles, but then also has that 2.4 gigahertz dongle, which is magnetic as well, so you're not going to lose it. And of course, you can also use it USB-C wired if you want to not worry about battery either. Not only that, it has a 4,000 milliamp hour battery. I'm not sure how many hours it's rated for because there's not a lot in the listing, but I've never had this battery die on me once. Now, to be fair, I'm not using this thing every day, but I do think that having a 4,000 milliamp hour battery is very impressive. Not only that, this thing looks and feels great. It is a smaller 75% keyboard like the ones we were just looking at, but it has linear switches that feel really good. It is a little bit louder than the Nuphy just because it is a high profile keyboard, as you can see here, but in general, I think it sounds great. Let me give you a listen compared to the alternatives really quickly. They've also got a bunch of different color options in terms of just the shell and the keys and whatnot, but I chose this one, which has black and blue and gold. It also has a volume knob as well as RGB lighting if you want to use that as well. So I think there's just a lot of really nice things about this keyboard, especially at this price point. However, it's not perfect. One of my major complaints about it is that the keys feel a little bit sharp on their edges. Like they are not as rounded as I would like them to be, and so I can definitely feel that edge as I'm typing. In addition, the design itself is kind of plain. After all, it's kind of just a generic keyboard, but depending on what you like to see on your desk, this might be just fine. Either way, I did want to bring this one up as an alternative budget option because I think that for the money, this one is probably the best keyboard of them all, just because I picked it up for $40. Anyway, that's all I really have for this video. I think that in general, if you're looking for a really nice retro style keyboard, the Nuphy one is probably my favorite in terms of feel, but that 8BitDo one looks very good as well. But I would recommend changing out the switches if you can. And then of course, if you're just looking for a nice new mechanical keyboard and you don't want to break the bank, then this one from Surman or Spockkeep or whatever it's called, this is a pretty good option as well. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Are you into keyboards? Which one do you prefer? And as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.